Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Palapa Girivaradhari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Gaunitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 58, and there are two texts today, text 36 and 37. So text 36. Param vilokya bimatam samagatam Narendra Kanya Chakamapatim Buyadaya me patir ashisho halam nala Karotu satya yadi me drito vrataham Param bilokya bimatam samagatam Narendra Kanya Chakame Patim Buyadaya me patir ashisho nalaha Karotu satya yadi me trito vrataha Param bilokya bimatam samagatam Narendra Kanya Chakame Ramapatim Buyadaya me patira shisho nalaham Karotu satya yadme trito vrataha. Please chant. Param vilokya bimatam samagatam Narendra Kanya Chakame Ramapatim Buyadaya me patira shisho nalam Karotu satya yadme trito vrataha. Would you like to try? Param vilokya bimatam samagatam Narendra Kanya Chakame Ramapatim Buyadaya me patira shisho nalaha Rotu satya yadme trito vrataha. Thank you. So the word for word. Varam, sutta. Vilokya, seeing. Abhimatam, agreeable. Samagatam, arrived. Narendra, of the king. Kanya, the daughter. Chakame, desired. Rama, of the goddess of fortune. Patim, the husband. Uyat, may become. I am, he. Me, my. Pati, husband. Ashisha, hopes. Anala, the fire. Karotu, made make. Satya, true. Yadi, if. Me, by me. Trita, sustained. Vrata, my vows. And the translation for text 36. When the king's daughter saw that most agreeable suitor arrive, she immediately desired to have him, the Lord of Goddess Rama. She prayed, quote, "May he become my husband if I have kept my vows. May the sacred fire bring about the fulfillment of my hopes." Close quote. And then text 37. So that was Satya talking. Yatspada Pankaja Raja Shirasha Bipati Shir Abhyaja Sagiri Sahaloka Palai Lila Tanum Svakrita Setu Paripasyaya Kale Dadatsa Bhagavan Mama Kena Tusyet. And the translation for text 37, quote, so this is still Satya talking. Goddess Lakshmi, Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and the rulers of the various planets place the dust of his lotus feet on their heads, and to protect the codes of religion which he has created, he assumes past-time incarnations at various times. How may that Supreme Personality of Godhead become pleased with me? Close quote. Om Jnana-Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Rakutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakha Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Taribhyas Cha Kripa Sindhuvya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Romapada Swami iti namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So the first sentence in text 36 reads, quote, "When the king's daughter saw that most agreeable suitor arrive, she immediately desired to have him, the Lord of Goddess Rama," close quote. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he points out that Satya saw, and the word that was used, Vilokya Krishna, through the lattice window of the palace, watchtower. So she was in a very high position to see the arrival of Lord Krishna. So this is coming from Sarata Darshini. So this verse is in fact describing Satya's understanding that Krishna himself had come to marry her. So Srila Prabhupada describes this particular moment in time. So this is how Srila Prabhupada describes it. She was very much pleased that the husband of the goddess of fortune had so kindly come there to accept her. For a long time, she had cherished the idea of marrying Krishna and was following the principles of austerity to obtain her desired husband. So that's Srila Prabhupada describing something of the mood of Satya and something of her deep desire. And if one thinks back a little bit, there's, in a very similar way, Kalindi, who was the river Yamuna personified, she'd also engaged in austerities to obtain Lord Vishnu as her husband. And we hear about this because she tells Arjuna, because Krishna and Arjuna had come upon her in the forest, or while they were hunting in the forest. She tells Arjuna, because he's inquiring about her identity, and this is Kalindi. And while he's inquiring about her identity, he adds, I'm assuming, or I'm guessing, that you're searching for a suitable husband, because he's seeing that austerities are being performed. And she had said to him, responding to Arjuna, Sir, I'm the daughter of the sun god, and I'm now performing penance and austerity to have Lord Vishnu as my husband. I think he is the supreme person and just suitable to become my husband. I disclose my desire thus because you wanted to know it. So that was Kalindi, directly telling Arjuna that she's performing austerities with a particular purpose in mind, and that she's actually revealing her desire to him because he actually directly asked her. And of course, he even told her directly, I'm assuming you're actually looking for a suitable husband. So I'm going back to Kalindi, but in this particular circumstance, we hear also how the thinking of Satya is. And this is Srila Prabhupada who's revealing it. And this is how Srila Prabhupada writes. She then began to think, so this is Satya, the current princess who's just seen Krishna arriving to marry her. If I have performed any pious activities to the best of my ability, and if I have sincerely thought all along to have Krishna as my husband, then Krishna may be pleased to fulfill my long cherished desire. So she's reflecting, because she had not known that Krishna was coming. She's suddenly seen him, so she's actually reflecting, well, if I've sincerely thought all along that Krishna should be my husband, and I've done all my pious activities to the best of my ability, then, may he be pleased with me. So both Kalindi and Satya, they show the following particular point, and that is that they're following the principles of austerity to obtain the husband each of them desired, the supreme person. So the austerity is described of Kalindi, and that is that she was dwelling in a solitary place, in fact a mansion below the waters of the Yamuna that her father had built for her, performing deity worship, because this is all taking place in Dvapara Yuga, and we know that that's the process of connecting with the Supreme Lord. The particular Yuga defines the process for doing so, and so she was performing deity worship, and she'd also taken a vow to remain in the water for as long as she could not see Krishna. So we're hearing this is like something of the austerity that's been performed, something of the vow that's been taken. This is a penance. You specifically make a vow that you're going to actually perform some particular activity with a particular purpose. So her particular vow is that she was not going to move from that solitary place in all the time until she could see Lord Krishna. And we hear also now Satya, she also takes a vow. So this is her particular penance and austerity. And this is how she puts it, quote, may the fire whom I have long worshipped as my deity make my desires come true. if the rules for worship were followed with attention. So this is actually this particular vow, and its wording has come from H.G.Krsnarcana, who's actually giving what Satya's vow is. So you can see also the process of deity worship. There's been a sacred fire, and she's actually trying to acknowledge that her activities in connection with Lord Krishna were properly executed, and so in that way it could be pleasing to him. So now, looking at Kalindi, she had a particular understanding of how her desire would be fulfilled. So, knowing Arjuna was a great devotee of Lord Krishna, she tells him, "My dear sir, I know that you are the hero Arjuna. So I may further say that I shall not accept anyone as my husband, because he is the only protector of living entities and the bestower of liberation for all conditioned souls," meaning Lord Vishnu. "I shall be thankful unto you if you pray to Lord Vishnu to be pleased with me." So she's got her way that she actually believes her desire can be fulfilled. So she doesn't know that Krishna has said Arjuna to make this inquiry of her, of who she is and what she is doing in that solitary place. But she recognizes this is a devotee of Lord Krishna, and so she's actually revealing what her vow is, the purpose of her austerity, and she's saying that because she knows Arjuna is a very great devotee of Lord Krishna, then can he please pray on her behalf to Lord Vishnu, so that Lord Vishnu becomes pleased with her austerity and her vow. And in the case of Satya, Srila Prabhupada describes her beginning to offer prayers to Krishna. So Kalindi used the angle of asking Arjuna to pray on her behalf to be able to obtain Lord Vishnu as her husband. And here, this is how Satya goes about it. So Srila Prabhupada describes the prayers she begins to make to Lord Krishna, and it's revealing her mental process. So this is how she's thinking. "I do not know how the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be pleased with me. He's the master and Lord of everyone. May the fire fulfill my desires." My computer jumped a little bit, sorry. "May the fire fulfill my desires. Even the goddess of fortune, whose place is next to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Lord Shiva, and Lord Brahma, and many other demigods of different planets, always offer their respectful obeisances unto the Lord. The Lord also sometimes descends to the earth in different incarnations to fulfill the desires of his devotees. He's so exalted and great that I do not know how to satisfy him." So this is Satya looking at this question of, how can, and praying through her expressions of uncertainty, of not knowing how to please Lord Krishna. You could contrast her with Kalindi, who used a very particular angle of, "Arjuna, please pray for the fulfillment of my desire to have Lord Vishnu as my husband." And Kalindi is in this very kind of humble mood. I don't know how to satisfy him. So her particular thought was that the Supreme Personality of Godhead could be pleased only out of his causeless mercy, which he usually showers upon his devotees. Otherwise, there was no means to please him. So it's a very humble approach. So the Lord's mercy on his devotee is expressed by him So this is Krishna himself talking about how he bestows mercy on his devotees. Just to get some insight into the understanding that Satya had. And this is coming from Srimad Bhagavatam in the 9th canto in the 4th chapter. This is Krishna speaking. Since pure devotees give up their homes, wives, children, relatives, riches, and even their lives simply to serve me, without any desire for material improvements, this life or in the next, how can I give up such devotees at any time? So, in a sense, this statement by Lord Krishna gives insight into the Lord's recognition of the devotee's sacrifice and his being indebted by such sacrifice. So, of course, in the case of both Satya and Kalindi, they had actually given up a great deal. So, in the case of Kalindi, she'd given up her home with her father. She was dwelling alone, of course, in a mansion built by her father, but alone, and just performing austerities. And you could say that in the case of Satya, she'd actually dedicated her life through her focus on having Lord Krishna as her husband, but in a very a mood of humility, a great mood of humility. So the important criterion that is that in neither case were they looking for material improvement in their life. It's not that either of them was thinking, oh, if I have a suitable, wealthy husband, I'm going to be suitably wealthy and in the correct position, and all the comforts will be there. That's not the thinking. It's rather that there's a mood of sacrifice. And Krishna is recognizing that. How can I give up such devotees at any time? So Krishna has a sense of indebtedness to his devotees. And Srila Prabhupada highlights that having attachment to one's home, one's spouse, one's children, even having attachment to friendship, having attachment to society, is not the way to achieve the favor of the Supreme Lord. Now, Srila Prabhupada reiterates this. He says that one who is attached to hearth and home, so to speak, for material pleasure, cannot become a pure devotee. So, of course, if one is in a situation where one is actually attracted to or even has a habit of, having a home and spouse and children, but at the same time one is wanting to serve the Supreme Lord to the best of his ability, then the Lord makes an arrangement, and this may sound frightening in one sense, but it's done very much in accord with the point of development of the devotee. But this is Srila Prabhupada putting it this way, that the Lord makes an arrangement to take away the objects of his false attachment and thus free him from such attachment. So Lord Krishna finds a way to help the person who is trying to serve him but still has all these attachments, those sort of attachments that give mental comfort, emotional comfort. And it's not that those things, it's incorrect to have that. It's sort of natural. But at the same time, because the idea is that one needs to come to a point where one's freed oneself from material attachment, then the Lord assists one through that process. So it's not an easy road that one is following in taking to the worship of the Supreme Lord. And in the case of these two young princesses, that they were wanting to have Krishna as the supreme husband, the supreme person should be their husband, it's also done in the consciousness that they're wishing to serve, and they also have this concern that he be pleased with him, that he bestow their mercy upon them, meaning that, whatever attachments may be there, that those are not in their hearts, because that frees up that connection with the Supreme Lord. And also by way of explanation of the Lord's view of one who looks to his devotee for shelter, which was in the case of Kalindi, she looked to the shelter of Arjuna. Lord Krishna explains it this way: I am completely under the control of my devotees. Indeed, I'm not at all independent. Because my devotees are completely devoid of material desires, I sit only within the core of their hearts. What to speak of my devotee? Even those who are devotees of my devotee are very dear to me. So we have this reiteration on the part of Lord Krishna that he's actually within the core of the devotee's heart, that devotee who is free of material desires. And not only does he do that with his direct devotees, but persons who come to be devoted to a devotee of his. So they're not maybe even directly looking to Lord Krishna, but they are very close to a devotee of Lord Krishna. Those persons are also very, very dear to Lord Krishna. So the statement of Satya that she makes, that many demigods, and this is in the next text, text 37, that many demigods, for example, Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, offer their respectful obeisances to the Supreme Lord. She makes that comment. And this is also borne out by the fact that from Lord Krishna's statement, one can learn about these devotees. And Srila Prabhupada calls Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma stalwart personalities of the universe, means that they're very much in their position, they're constantly there, they're constantly devoted to the Supreme Lord. And Lord Krishna's statement that they're fully under his control, and that he's fully under their control. So you notice it's a reciprocal relationship. So the reason this is so is that the devotee has no material desires within his heart. His only desire is to always think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and how to serve him, Hare Krishna, and how to serve him in the best possible way. So this kind of mood of always wanting to think of the Supreme Lord and always trying to think how to serve him, it's a transcendental qualification. So one actually gets that the mercy of Lord Krishna allows for one to be able to function in this way, always thinking of the Lord and always thinking how to serve him. So this allows the Lord, by a person having that mood, it allows the Lord to be very favorably disposed towards his devotees. And not only his devotees, but also the devotees of his devotee. So this was the understanding of Kalindi, because she had looked to the favor of Arjuna, praying for her getting Krishna as her husband. So she was looking to Arjuna's prayer for her on her behalf to Lord Krishna. So this is the same prayer that Lord Chaitanya actually makes in the role of a devotee. So just to capture this mood, Lord Chaitanya says, Gopi Bhartu Pada Kamaloe Das Dasa Dasa Anudasa, to be a servant of the servant of Lord Krishna. So one of the princesses exemplifies that particular mood that Lord Chaitanya spells out in the mood of a devotee. Now, Srila Jiva Goswami states that Satya, she listed the rulers of the universe, these stalwart personalities of the universe, as Srila Prabhupada puts it, to show her own insignificance. So, Lord Shiva is considered less than Lord Brahma because he acts as Lord Brahma's student. And also, Lord Brahma is in the superior position because he directly utilized the Maha Mantra. So by saying that Krishna accepted various forms to protect Dharma indicates that he's the original avatar. So that was her statement in text 37. So just expanding on this, there's an explanation of devotional service. This is given in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 29th chapter, that indicates that the pure devotee of the Lord accepts each body as the temple of the Lord. And the devotee offers full respects to such temples of the Lord in full knowledge of the presence of the Lord. So even when you hear such a referencing these devotees and, seeing herself in an insignificant position, because that's very much her mood, this mood of humility, she's actually also, as with any great devotee, there's an implied worship of those great personalities because she's understanding that their very forms are temples of the Lord because they're carrying Lord Krishna within their hearts. So in fact, she's giving full respect to them because they're in relationship with the Supreme Lord. And so in that third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 29th chapter, there's this particular very nice statement. Such a perfect devotee offers respects to every living entity because he is under the firm conviction that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has entered the body of every living entity as the super soul or controller. This is going to be a short class. So in conclusion, it may be said that the Lord is noble only by those who are above all pretensions. And this is significant because when you hear of these two princesses, you could ask the question, isn't there some strong personal motivation that they have in mind a particular husband and they're performing austerities for a particular husband? So isn't that sort of self-interest in some sort of way? But actually, just through doing this analysis of how they're approaching the way of obtaining the Supreme Lord as their husband, and the particular understanding that's there that allows either for looking to a devotee of the Supreme Lord to actually pray on her behalf in the case of Kalindi, or else actually just having this mood of great humility of her own insignificance, which is the case with Satya, one can understand that in fact both princesses are above all pretensions. There's no pretension of any kind. They want to serve the Supreme Lord only because he is great. And they see themselves as eternally subordinate living entities that are part and parcel of the Lord. And this is interesting because, when one goes through the Vedic literature and, you hear Srila Prabhupada talking, he very much paints this picture that could questioned, especially in Western society, that the woman, to a large extent, is seeing herself as a servitor of her husband. And naturally, this sort of rubs against the grain in Western society from the point of view that it implies a little bit of a subordinate position. But when the position is taken that actually one is wanting to serve the Supreme Lord, even in that relationship, then actually there's it's the means for coming to know the Supreme Lord. So it's part of the process of self-realization. So, and it's a very natural state, and something of these two highly elevated princesses just actually makes one deeply respectful of these two personalities who do have this firm conviction that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is actually just so great, and they're happy to be in a position subordinate to him. In their case, they're wishing for him to be their husband because they see it as a very suitable match, and obviously they're highly elevated personalities. But at least it's kind of brings an acceptance of, and I speak this because I've grown up in Western society, this idea that somehow it smacks of a kind of almost sexist approach if the woman is seen as just serving the husband. But in fact, it can be used as part of the process of self-realization and is part of the process of elevating one's consciousness that one is indeed reviving one's relationship to the Supreme Lord in the realm of that particular relationship in the home setting. So those are some thoughts on these two simple verses. If there's anything to add to the discussion, slightly short class, but these were some things that at least stood out for me.
Hare Krishna Mata, thank you so much for highlighting your insights. You mentioned Kalindi when she met Arjuna. She asked Arjuna to pray for her on her behalf to Krishna, and we see this on several occasions in several pastimes that devotee approach advanced devotees to make a prayer for them. But there is also a need to have our own connection with Krishna. I, however, a lot of people come in contact with pure devotees, but not all of them become devotees. I think it's very important to understand I need to have my own conscious contact with Krishna for me to have a spiritual life. Having association of advanced devotees and asking for their prayers certainly helps a lot because they are in closer contact with Krishna, but I need my own connection as well.
So that's a thought you're expressing. It's not to the exclusion of one or the other, but it's more a reflection on great intelligence on the part of the person who is aspiring to connect with the Supreme Lord, that there's recognition of personalities that are further on the path of self-realization and connection with Krishna, and so appealing to those personalities for their protection and the shelter of their lotus feet, so that Krishna can be pleased with one because one has taken shelter of their lotus feet, his very dear devotee. So this doesn't mean that one doesn't have a connection with the Supreme Lord. It means that one's enhancing one's connection with the Supreme Lord, because if one takes shelter of a very advanced personality, somebody who is very dear to Lord Krishna, then one comes to understand better something of how one should order one's life that's in line with moving forward in Krishna consciousness. On one's own, one is still has the problem of, falling prey to one's nature and not being able to distinguish at certain times if it's one's nature that's dictating or whether it's actually on the transcendental plane. So, for that kind of clarity, the advanced devotees' insight can actually open up the path much more and strengthen one's connection to the Supreme Lord, because they're giving guidance. They're protectors on the path of Krishna consciousness, because by their guidance, one will always stay in the right track, because it's easy to go off the track believing in one's own strength or one's own intelligence or one's own clarity of understanding, or that one's mind is very strong, and it doesn't mean that one can always make perfect distinctions of or perfect decisions on one's own, on the strength of one's own mind and own intelligence. So, in fact, actually, it wouldn't be completely correct to say that one needs to have one's own connection with the Supreme Lord, and one can have a connection with an elevated personality or somebody who's dear to the Supreme Lord. Rather, the two should work in tandem. And in fact, one's connection with the Supreme Lord is strengthened through that connection with a dear devotee of his. So that's a thought on your comment.
Hare Krishna. I just really appreciated how you highlighted the princess in her desire to have Krishna as her husband, but the essence of that being they wanted Krishna as their husband to be able to serve him, and not so much to gain something, but to be able to have those material desires removed to the point where they can just be solely focused on Krishna. And this is something I've been exploring a lot lately. Like what it means to desire Krishna as your husband, but then also understanding like this concept of unmotivated service to Krishna that the pure devotees have. Because a lot of time when I'm in material conditions, I was just speaking with a few senior devotees yesterday about this. Like, we're still in this mindset of wanting to be the enjoyer. And so even when we look at wanting Krishna as our husbands, it's not necessarily because, oh, I want to serve him, but it's more because, like, what can I get out of having the Supreme Lord as my, husband? And so cultivating that mood of just, serving and giving with no expectation in return seems to be something that's like fully over my head. And so getting to a point of being able to like realize that, I just appreciate it coming up again, because I feel like the more that the theme comes up, the more that I really have to sit with it and explore it more.
So yeah, it's a nice thought that it can go over one's head indeed. That it's possible to just be thinking, how to serve the Supreme Lord in a very unmotivated kind of way. Um, yeah, that kind of, this is the path of Krishna consciousness. All the attachments that are there in the heart, the mind, the intelligence, they're gradually getting eroded because one is cultivating, always moving, trying to move in the direction of wanting to serve Lord Krishna. So there's an erosion of those material desires. So it's a very gradual process, because we're doing it through following the rules and regulation of sadhana bhakti. So, the great personalities that we're reading about, associates of the Supreme Lord. So they're already in a purified state. Those material kind of attachments are not there, but you see that they still pray and look for assistance, because that's the mood. The mood is always the same, that one wants to be free of any kind of material attachment. One wants to think always of the Supreme Lord. One wants to think always how to serve him. So, I mean, one goes through one's daily life, like, and I often think about it. I think, if you were to tell a regular person who isn't practicing devotional life that actually, one is thinking of the Supreme Lord through the day, they might find it very peculiar, because it seems that in material life, you give your attention to a material activity, each material activity using your material intelligence, and that requires your focus at that particular time. But that it's possible that there's a level of functioning, that there's thinking of the Supreme Lord through all the activities. It's not really understandable without understanding that one is practicing sadhana bhakti. So one sadhana is the propelling force that allows for that concept to get more grounded and not, just go like that, because you realize the sadhana is fueling exactly that Lord Krishna says is the way the heart needs to be for him to actually be bestowing his mercy, or not needs to be that way for him to bestow his mercy, because his mercy is causeless, but that is what is pleasing him. So just the fact that one has got that basis of sadhana is allowing for that thinking of Lord Krishna and wanting to please him. The sadhana grounds everything. So that's already fulfilling the criterion for the Lord to be recognizing one as his devotee and wanting to care for one as his devotee and being pleased with one as his devotee, because one has that base that's grounding everything.
That's really encouraging, because especially on the path of like cultivating this sincere mood within bhakti, a lot of times, when you chant and you perform services, like all these anarthas and dirty things come up, and then you really see yourself and you see the conditionings, and it's like, it's really intense sometimes, And so to, have that encouragement that the more that you practice and just that sadhana is what pulls you through, it's kind of an important reminder, in the midst of it. But then also, one other thing that came to mind as you were expressing was keeping like the Supreme Lord in like thought, in all of our activities daily. And I know sometimes, especially living in the temple and, constantly engaging in devotional service, it's like I'm not always thinking like, oh, I'm doing this for Krishna. Sometimes I'm just going through the service and I'm just in the service, but I don't have like, you're not thinking like Krishna, like, oh my Krishna, like it's not like I'm not like meditating on him in my heart. I'm just kind of doing the service knowing that it's for his pleasure, but I'm not always so consciously aware of that. So is that something that we should be cultivating more of?
Yes, that's an interesting question. It sort of touches on, should one deliberately bring into one's consciousness that one is performing actions for Krishna? And yes, it's nice to do so. I mean, at some point, it becomes like one's regular functioning, that one's conscious that one's living one's life for Krishna. But certainly in earlier times, one can remind one's mind. One can use the intelligence to help the poor mind that's, just slugging along. The mind just goes along and sometimes says, oh, I like this, or I don't like that, or, complains a little bit, oh, why is this like this? Oh, this is not so good, or, oh, this is wonderful that it's this way. So as the mind's going through its little thing, uh, just using the intelligence to remind oneself that actually, I am performing this activity with the desire to please Lord Krishna, so I'm going to do my very best to do it in a nice way. And that's was mentioned here by Krishna himself. There's that, or I think Srila Prabhupada bringing up the point that The Lord recognizes when somebody is just trying to serve Him with the best of their ability. So that's the important part. So it does require being conscious. So you bring the intelligence into the whole equation where you actually think, I'm going to do this well. I'm going to do it carefully. I'm going to do it consciously. So that's the important part in the whole picture. Thinking to do one's best. Somehow that changes everything, and that allows for that consciousness, that deliberate consciousness to be operating. Because, you motivating yourself to the best of my ability, I'm going to do this. Yeah, that's a response.
Is there time for one more question?
Good.
How do we distinguish, I guess, how do we distinguish when it's the mind that's dictating things?
Oh, yeah. That's an interesting question. How do you know when the mind is actually ruling and running one's activities? Yeah, it takes time to recognize that the mind has a particular pattern, and that one is even subservient to that pattern. But over time, because one is practicing sadhana, one starts to see that the mind is dictating something, but one starts to question it. So I think you yourself once gave me an example where, the mind is saying something, and then the intelligence says, but how can I do that? It wouldn't be correct. So that questioning that comes allows you to gradually over time start to recognize some patterns in the mind. So initially one may not see a pattern, one may see isolated incidents where you question yourself, even though it seems like you're questioning yourself, but really what you're doing is you're questioning your mind. So the mind already has a pattern. It's comfortable with known behaviors, like something of one's relationships through one's upbringing create a certain pattern. So if one's parent always reinforced some behavior, the mind now carries that pattern. Oh, I am rewarded for this behavior. So you don't even know that actually you indulging in a particular behavior and you expecting a reward for that behavior, but you've already had a whole history of it, but you don't even remember that. But the mind has recorded it. So you perform a particular behavior and you have the expectation that that reward will come. And then suddenly it happens that you perform a behavior, but you're not getting those rewards. And then the intelligence goes, what? Or the mind goes, huh? And the intelligence says, well, why am I looking for a reward for this behavior? I don't need a reward for this behavior. It's good behavior. I can do this without a reward. So the sadhana and the direction of Krishna starts to give one insight into the workings of the mind. And the first way you'll start to recognize it is you start questioning something. Oh, why am I expecting this? Why do I think it should be like this? Initially, one will go along with the mind and actually think, yeah, my mind's saying, no, I don't like this. Oh, yeah, it must be that it's no good. But, with intelligence, because you're practicing sadhana, intelligence is coming from the soul level. And so one actually starts to think, well, it's not actually correct for me to be wanting to do that kind of behavior or have that attitude or that mood. I want to change it. And why should I be thinking like that? But the emotions are connected. In the mind, there's lots of emotions connected to those patterns. So you have to do a sorting. But Krishna gives the intelligence where you question how the mind is pushing you to behave. It's not always correct. It's just some learned pattern. Somehow something was reinforced here, this behavior was not reinforced there, or there was erratic reinforcement, and the mind has developed some pattern. I mean, you know, in behavioral psychology, there's a whole thing that, you know, a bell is sounded. This very early experiments in behavioral psychology. A bell is sounded, and a dog comes to know that now, when the bell sounds, food is going to come. So after a while, every time the bell sounds, the dog starts salivating, but no food is visible because the dog has learned the pattern. Oh, there's an association between the sound of the bell and food coming. So it's that sort of thing, as fundamental as that, but on more complex levels. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. So it's perfect timing. All your questions filled the gap in the extra time that was left after the short class. So thank you very much, both of you, for your very kind attention. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Thank you.